Welcome back. Well, I hope you're excited about doing some hypnosis. Now, hypnosis is always going to be a lot smoother, more effective and faster when it's a two-way interaction, when we're actually in the same room, or at least when we can communicate back and forth and it's not just a one-way interaction. So the obvious limitation that we have here is that you're watching me on a screen and I can't see you. There are, however, three suggestions that I'd like to give you that'll help make the process more effective and sort of overcome the obvious limitation as best as we can. Now, one of the most fascinating areas of brain research over the last few decades has been around the area of what they call mirror neurons, which are essentially kind of responsible for the part of the brain that controls empathy. So let's say, for example, you were hungry and you took a bite of an ice cream. Well, a certain part of the brain is going to light up. But let's say that you're feeling hungry and now you see somebody else taking a bite of an ice cream. Now those mirror neurons start to light up in our brain as if instinctually associating with what it would be like to be in that person's situation. So film writers, directors, actors, especially if they're particularly good at what they can do, they're good at being able to get us to connect with the characters they're portraying, get us to feel the character's pain, feel their hope, feel their excitement, basically feel what it would be like to be that person. This part of the brain seems to respond especially well by picking up on the way that somebody is moving, their body language essentially, non-verbal communication. These are animal instincts that developed long before we had the ability to use words to communicate. One of the most interesting examples where this pops up in everyday life is the way in which we tend to copy or mirror each other's body language when we're in a strong state of rapport with somebody. In fact, next time you're out at a restaurant, have a look around at the couples sitting around you. You can tell which couples have a stronger sense of rapport and a bond with each other, because the ones that have a stronger sense of rapport will be essentially kind of copying or mirroring each other's body language. So let's say, for example, someone sort of sighs or sort of leans in to express something. If they're in a strong sense of rapport, the other person is likely to do something very similar a few moments later. In fact, if you wanted to, you can actually strengthen and speed the rate of rapport that you develop with somebody simply by mirroring their body language, mirroring the energy that they're communicating. So let's say, for example, they're talking about a film that they recently saw and they squint their eyes and go, oh, that movie was really terrible. Well, you could respond by saying, oh, yeah, it really was, wasn't it? And you're squinting your eyes when you're talking about the movie the same way that they were squinting their eyes when they spoke about the movie. Or let's say somebody sort of leans back and spreads and goes, oh, yeah, look, Broome is the best place in the world to travel to. It's a really great destination. Again, you could do the same. You sort of spread your body language out and go, oh, yeah, it's the greatest place in the world. And even if you've never been there, you could spread out and say, oh, it sounds like it's really great. I'd like to go there. Again, it's about kind of mirroring the same energy when speaking about the same thing. So eventually what happens is that energy becomes mirrored back and forth, and it becomes kind of like a dance where you're sort of both moving in the same sort of rhythm at the same time. And so when this starts to happen, when two people are mirroring each other's facial expressions or tone of voice or body language especially, essentially the caveman part of the brain really sort of starts to pick up on this message that we are connected, we're part of the same tribe, essentially. Now, once this effect starts to take place, it can take a couple of minutes or so before the physiological response really starts to kick in, but once it does, it can have a profound impact on how we're feeling. It can help us feel a stronger sense of connection. It helps us feel essentially kind of more open, and basically we start to feel more relaxed. So to get warmed up and to lead into the hypnotic exercise, you and I need to develop a sense of rapport, at least as best as we can, given the obvious limitation. And so the way we're going to do that is by establishing a kind of rhythm or connection between each other's body language. And this is the way that we're going to do this, okay? In the following video, you'll see me sitting in front of the relax tank. Now you'll be able to hear the sound of my voice, which has been pre-recorded, but you won't see my mouth moving, and that's because your mouth won't be moving. To establish that sense of rapport, I'm going to ask you to copy the same movements that you see me making. So for example, we're going to start by sitting up straight, taking a few deep breaths in unison with each other, and then I'm going to make some really simple sort of hand gestures around the screen that I'm going to ask you to follow. Now, the actual gestures themselves are completely arbitrary. It's just about us getting into sync so that our bodies are moving in the same way at the same time with the same kind of rhythm, sharing the same kind of energy. And then I'm going to ask you to look directly into my eyes, but also pay attention to my breathing. So when I breathe in, I'm going to ask you to breathe in at the same time. And when I breathe out, I'm going to ask you to breathe out at the same time. So that way, essentially, we're synchronizing each other's breathing rate. And this will keep going for another couple of minutes or so, during which time the breath will get slightly slower and slightly deeper as time moves forward. And after we've been doing that for a couple of minutes, then I'll ask you to close your eyes and just follow my voice into your imagination. Now, it's important to realize that if this feels a little bit strange at first, that's perfectly normal. But again, anytime those thoughts about feeling weird or strange or unnatural, anytime those kind of thoughts kind of pop into your mind, simply respond by telling yourself that it's okay and bring your awareness back to the next step. This is not quite the way that we do it if we're communicating back and forth, face to face, but given the obvious limitation, I think it's the most effective way to help you get the most out of this exercise. Here's the second seed of thought, also related to your biochemistry, your neurology, and especially your body language and posturing. Now, it's no secret that our body kind of responds to how we're feeling. Okay, if we're feeling a bit uncomfortable, we're more likely to sit slouched. If we're feeling a little bit threatened, we're more likely to tuck our chin in, because the caveman instinct recognizes that the throat's the most vulnerable area of the body that could be attacked by a predator. So if we're feeling a bit guarded, we're more likely to be a bit more closed in our body language. But likewise, when we're feeling more confident and certain of ourselves without necessarily realizing it, we're more likely to stand or sit up straight, our shoulders are back, and our chin tends to be more up, as if to show the world, see, I'm not threatened, I'm confident. That's kind of the message that we're giving unconsciously. This way in which our body responds to how we're feeling is so instinctual that even athletes who have been blind their entire lives and never seen anybody else do it will instinctually kind of throw their arms up in the air in a V shape when they've just won a race, when they're feeling successful and powerful. See, more intuitive people, or people that are just really good at reading body language, they already kind of know this stuff. But here's the part that's particularly interesting, and that is that it's not just that our body positioning responds to how we're feeling, our feelings actually respond to how our body is positioned. Studies have actually shown that if you were to sit or stand in a more closed position like this, after a couple of minutes, the body actually starts to respond by producing more stress hormones like cortisol, the effect on the mind of which starts to create self-doubt. In other words, the body sort of feels like it's under threat, under attack. But funnily enough, if you were to sit or stand in a more open position, then after a couple of minutes, the body actually starts to produce less stress hormone and starts to produce more testosterone, which in turn makes us feel more sure of ourselves, more strong and confident. In fact, in a famous set of studies conducted by Harvard psychology professor Amy Cuddy, as described in her famous TED Talk, what researchers did was they got people and put them in a job interview kind of situation, because we know that job interviews is one of the things that people tend to get the most stressed about. Now, prior to the interview, people were asked to either sit in a more closed position for a few minutes or to sit in a more open position for a few minutes. Then the interviewers were asked to rank candidates based on how confident they appeared. Now, the interviewees didn't know the reason why they were asked to either sit in a closed or open position prior to the interview, and the interviewers didn't know which candidate belonged to which group. Yet despite that, on average, the interviewers gave a significantly higher ranking to the candidates who had been sitting in a more open position prior to the interview. So the take-home message here is this. Next time you're feeling a bit unsure about yourself, next time you're noticing thoughts of self-doubt circulating around your mind, remember, chin up, shoulders back, few deep breaths, feet flat on the floor if you're in a seated position. And this is especially important when you're pondering questions like, I wonder what my future self would do in this situation. Now, like I said, it can take a couple of minutes before the effect really starts to kick in, but once it does, it can have a profound impact on how you're feeling. And most significantly, can also increase your awareness about the extent to which your mind and your body are connected in a way more powerful than what you previously realized. Now, the third seed of thought relates to something that I've always been fascinated with, which is the topic of dreams. Now, everybody dreams, not everybody remembers their dreams, and even those of us who do remember their dreams usually only remember a very small percentage of them. Now, when we're asleep, the more logical parts of our brain essentially kind of shut down, and it's the more primitive caveman part of the brain that's more active during our sleep, which is why the dream world seems kind of weird and bizarre by comparison with our waking sense of reality. Now, while we're asleep, the brain goes through different brainwave activity cycles referred to as REM sleep and non-REM sleep. And scientists used to think that it was only during REM sleep that we'd dream, because if we wake up in the middle of a REM dream, then we'd be more likely to remember it and maybe talk about it that day and say, oh, last night I had this really bizarre dream where I was doing this weird stuff that didn't make any sense. The reality is, though, that any dreams that we remember because we wake up in the middle of them, we probably only remember what was going on for a few seconds or minutes prior to waking up. But the reality is that we're dreaming on and off throughout our entire sleep, but only remember a tiny percentage of it. The common theme among REM dreams is that they tend to be about exploring some kind of unresolved issue, as if trying to understand what it would be like to live out some sort of unresolved concern, as if the brain is trying to prepare for it so as not to be caught off guard. That seems to be the reason why we and other animals dream. It's often difficult for people to understand how dreaming about flying through the air or losing all your teeth or turning up to work in your undies or anything like that, it's kind of hard to understand how that bears any relationship at all to real world concerns. And where people often get lost in the translation is in understanding that the more primitive caveman brain, essentially active during sleep, thinks very symbolically by comparison. So let's say, for example, you had a dream where your teeth are crumbling and falling out. Well, see, during caveman times, if you lost your teeth, you wouldn't really be able to eat. It's not like saber-toothed tiger had come in pureed form. So that would represent symbolically a threat to your survival, your place in the world. Or let's say you had a dream about turning up to work in your undies, or some sort of similar example where you're kind of exposed or vulnerable to the people around you. See, during caveman times, our survival depended enormously on the protection and acceptance of the tribe. So dreams that explore themes of shame or being shunned or humiliated or exposed and not accepted by the tribe, again, pose a sort of instinctual threat to our survival. Let's say you recently got a new boss at work and you're feeling very sort of dominated by them, or you're feeling powerless in a relationship of some sort. Well, that may manifest in the dream world as being unable to kind of punch or kick or shoot or jump, or sort of unable to quite manage doing some sort of protective action that you would otherwise need to do to survive. Now, either way, a lot of people put effort into trying to understand the meaning of dreams, but to be honest, I'm less concerned with trying to understand the meaning of the dreams. I'm much more interested, however, in understanding what effect the dreams are having on us at the unconscious level. This is where I'm particularly fascinated by non-REM dreams. Now, it's only been recently discovered that we dream at all during non-REM sleep. REM dreams, the ones that we're more likely to remember, tend to sort of play out in our mind like a scene from a movie, and then it moves on to another scene, and then another scene, and so forth. Non-REM sleep dreams, however, tend to play out very different. They tend to be more like taking the scene of the movie and then fast forwarding it so it's all compacted into maybe 1 second, and then rewinding it and playing it again and again and again. So the same piece of information, the same scene, is compressed and compacted into a short burst of information over and over and over with enormous amounts of repetition. Now, take that into consideration, remembering that anything that we are doing with repetition, we're essentially practicing. We're training, we're conditioning our mind to create a neurological sense of familiarity towards. We already know from studies about mental practice that going over something in your mind over and over again creates a sense of familiarity, competence, and confidence. For example, in one famous study, researchers got basketball players to either practice shooting hoops for half an hour a day, every day for a week, or in another group they asked them to simply sit there and visualize shooting hoops in their mind for half an hour every day for a week. And then the third group, they asked to both do the physical practice for half an hour as well as the mental practice. And then a fourth control group did no practice at all. After a week, they found that the people who had simply visualized it in their mind made almost as much improvement as the people who have actually done the physical exercise. However, the people that had done both the physical and the mental practice, well, their improvements were the greatest. And as a result, it's not uncommon for musicians, athletes, surgeons, and other professionals to use mental practice as a way of improving their skill, going over it and over it again in their mind. Now, just think about what that means. It kind of means that if we're dreaming about something with enormous repetition, we're essentially training our brain to get better at it, not only without having to do it, but also without even remembering it or realizing that it's happening. Now that sounds kind of strange, doesn't it? That sounds, it's kind of like in the Matrix where they're able to just sort of upload these skills into their brain without having to go through the repetitious action of learning the skills and training over the years. But recent studies have shown that this is actually not so strange at all. Now this effect has perhaps been most thoroughly studied by another Harvard psychology professor, Robert Stickgold. What these researchers did was they'd get participants to engage in some kind of explorative quiz, like memory puzzles or exploring a maze in a computer game. And they'd get them to do that for an hour or two. And then what they'd do is ask them to come back later on, for example, 12 hours later. Now, some people would do the exercises early in the morning and then they'd come back 12 hours later in the evening. Others would do the exercises late in the evening and then come back early in the morning, 12 hours later, without a sleep in between. But the third group would do the exercise late at night, have a sleep, and then do it again 12 hours later, this time after having a sleep. Now these studies were repeated in all sorts of different ways using different time variations, using mazes, memory puzzles, and all sorts of different variations. But the same pattern was found time and time again, which was that if the participants were able to sleep after having done it the first time, they'd make significant improvements the second time by comparison with people that didn't sleep in between. Now, because most dreams aren't remembered, what they do then was they would intentionally wake them up during their sleep and say, hey, what were you just dreaming about right then? And then they'd record the results before the memory of the dream faded. And this is where it got really interesting because they'd find that if the participants recorded dreaming about anything even remotely symbolically related to the maze, the puzzle, whatever the exercise was, then they'd make anywhere up to 10 times the improvement when they were retested after waking up. So the results showed that basically if we're pondering something or exploring something in our mind just before going to bed, we're more likely to dream about it during our sleep, even though we don't remember it. And then we become so conditioned and familiar with that we actually make significant improvements after we wake up. So the lesson here is to be very cautious about what you put into your mind before going to bed, because while you're asleep, it'll likely be doing repetitious loops in your mind, even though you'll have no conscious memory that it was happening. So if you're thinking worrying, stressful, or depressing thoughts prior to going to sleep, well, then you're likely to get really good at being a worrier, being stressful, and being depressed. But alternatively, if you put new and empowering ways of thinking into your mind intentionally prior to going to bed, then you're likely to find it easier to start adopting those new and empowering ways of thinking once you wake up. And the catch is, you're likely to have no conscious memory of the fact that this was even taking place. So we're about to complete this session very shortly. Now, once it's over, if you decide that you want to go back and repeat the process again later on, you can do the whole session all in one go, or if it's easier for you, you can just break it up one lesson at a time. Either way, that's up to you. But my suggestion to you is this: make sure that you do it last thing at night before going to bed. Whether you do the whole session all in one go, or if you just do one lesson a night, that's up to you. But watch the videos, and most importantly, do the homework questions. Think about it, ponder it, explore it, and then sleep on it. And so with those three thoughts in mind now moving forward, make sure that you put a good half an hour aside with no distractions. Make sure you're in a nice, quiet, comfortable environment. Now, I've made two versions, one for men, one for women, just because I refer to your past and future self, so I'd rather say she or he rather than saying it. But either way, once you're ready to go ahead, select the version that's relevant for you, and then just sit back, get comfortable, relax, and enjoy the ride. I'll talk to you soon.
In the following exercise, Stuart will ask you to copy and mirror his posture, movements, and breathing as best you can for several minutes leading into the exercise. Although this may feel a bit unusual at first, it will slowly start to create a kind of unconscious rapport that will make it feel more like a two-way interaction. Speaking of body language, it's important to realize that not only does our posture respond to how we're feeling, but our feelings respond to how our body is postured. When you're sitting slouched, you feel less confident, whereas when you spread your posture out more, your body has a different hormonal response which starts to make you feel more confident. Keep this in mind during the exercise when Stuart directs you to adjust the way your body is postured. Finally, become aware that when we ponder certain challenges just prior to going to sleep, we tend to have repetitious dreams about them. Despite not remembering those dreams, they condition our unconscious with a greater sense of familiarity, so much that we can actually improve on certain skills when we sleep on it. Remember therefore to be cautious not to go to bed with negative thoughts in your mind. Instead, practice feeding your mind something that stimulates new and empowering thoughts before bed. That way, it will help to condition and grow your new mindset whilst you sleep. So with those 3 thoughts in mind now, go ahead and set aside at least half an hour in a quiet and comfortable environment. Select the appropriate exercise below and then just sit back, get comfortable, relax, and enjoy the ride.